The Media's Bias Against Donald Trump, a comprehensive study of adversarial coverage and resistance. The news media's relationship with Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, has been contentious, marked by consistent criticism of his policies and personal character. This essay examines the main adversaries in the news industry, their criticisms of Trump's policies, such as trade wars, immigration, and economic performance, and the underlying reasons for this opposition. It explores how media outlets often frame Trump's actions negatively, even in the face of policy successes, and contrasts this with their coverage of previous administrations. By analyzing specific examples, direct quotes, and patterns of reporting, this study illustrates the media's bias, highlighting the resistance, alleged lies, and cover-ups that shape public perception of Trump's presidency. Main adversaries in the news industry. The primary adversaries in the news industry critical of Trump include major outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, and NPR. These organizations, often characterized as part of the mainstream media, MSM, have been vocal in their opposition to Trump since his 2016 campaign. Their criticisms span his policies on trade, immigration, and economic performance, often framing them as xenophobic, racist, or reckless, regardless of outcomes. The New York Times frequently publishes editorials and opinion pieces labeling Trump's policies as authoritarian or discriminatory. For example, an April 2025 opinion piece called "Trump Fascist" for his immigration enforcement policies, comparing them to authoritarian tactics. The Washington Post, known for denouncing Trump's rhetoric as divisive, as seen in a 2020 report stating, Trump once again sought to deepen racial and cultural divisions in America rather than attempting to unify a country convulsed by the twin crises of the coronavirus pandemic and a reckoning on racism. CNN regularly critiques Trump's policies as harmful, with coverage often emphasizing negative aspects. For instance, CNN reported in 2025 that Trump's tariffs were causing widespread talk of trade wars, amplifying economic concerns despite mixed public views. MSNBC often aligns with progressive narratives, with commentators like Nikole Hannah-Jones arguing that Trump pursues a racial agenda, not an economic one, framing his policies as inherently discriminatory. NPR and PBS criticized for partisan coverage, with a 2025 White House fact sheet noting that PBS's coverage of the 2024 Republican National Convention was 72% negative, compared to 88% favorable coverage of the Democratic National Convention. These outlets contrast with pro-Trump voices, such as Fox News, Newsmax, and conservative commentators like Dan Bongino and Ben Shapiro, who argue that the MSM unfairly targets Trump. For example, a 2025 post on X by AJHSQ claimed 92% of coverage by media, despite ending the border crisis, successful Iran bombing, a stable, thriving economy, and myriad tariff deals, is against Trump. Patterns of criticism across Trump's policies. Trade war policies. Trump's trade policies, particularly his imposition of tariffs, have been a focal point of media criticism. In 2025, Trump announced tariffs on countries worldwide, which led to mixed economic outcomes. While some Americans viewed tariffs as potentially beneficial for long-term growth, 37% in an April 2025 Economist YouGov poll, 48% believed they were harmful to the economy and consumers. Media outlets often amplified the negative perspective, with CNN reporting that tariffs caused stock indices plunging and widespread talk of trade wars. When Trump initiated tariffs, critics argued he should have acted earlier. For example, during his first term, the New York Times criticized the timing of his China tariffs, suggesting they disrupted markets unnecessarily. Yet when tariffs in 2025 led to a 90-day pause on some measures, outlets like the Washington Post framed this as a retreat, implying policy inconsistency. This pattern suggests a damned if you do, damned if you don't approach, where Trump's actions are criticized regardless of timing or outcome. Immigration and accusations of xenophobia and racism. Trump's immigration policies, particularly his border security measures and rhetoric, have been consistently labeled as xenophobic and racist. A 2024 Politico analysis of Trump's rallies noted that he demonized minority groups in all of them, citing his use of terms like animals and stone-cold killers for migrants. Similarly, a 2025 New York Times article argued that Trump's attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs were a sanitized substitute for racist comments, quoting Margaret Huang of the Southern Poverty Law Center. His attacks on DEI aren't about a particular program, they're just a sanitized substitute for the racist comments that can no longer be spoken openly. This framing persists, despite evidence that immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than U.S.-born citizens, as noted by Politico. However, Trump's supporters, like those on X, argue that his focus on illegal immigration addresses legitimate security concerns, not race. For instance, a Prof. David Flint posted in July 2025, "Despite the first 6 months of Donald Trump's current term being among the most active ever, most of the mainstream media prefer to report stories they think are damaging. Economic performance and job numbers." When job numbers under Trump have been substantial, media outlets often downplay or question their significance. For example, in 2025, when economic indicators showed stability, the Economist YouGov poll noted that 60% of Americans heard mostly negative news about the U.S. economy, up from 43% in February. Outlets like CNN and The Washington Post emphasized inflation fears. 51% expected higher inflation over positive job growth, contrasting with their coverage of Obama's and Biden's economies, where positive metrics were often highlighted. A 2017 Pew Research Center study found that 62% of Trump's coverage in his first 60 days was negative, compared to 20% for Obama. When job numbers faltered, the media amplified the criticism. For instance, the New York Times ran stories in 2025 linking economic downturns to Trump's tariffs, ignoring global factors. In contrast, pro-Trump voices like Newsmax argued that the media ignored job growth under Trump while overemphasizing temporary setbacks. Why the media criticizes Trump? The media's critical stance stems from ideological differences, structural incentives, and historical tensions. Ideological divide. Many journalists identify as liberal or democratic-leaning, as noted in a 2020 Science Advances study, though it found no evidence of bias in story selection. This lean may influence framing, as seen in MSNBC's focus on Trump's racial agenda. Structural incentives, sensationalism drives engagement. A 2019 Columbia University study noted that media platforms feed more extreme stories to keep audiences engaged, a factor implicated in Trump's 2016 election. Negative coverage of Trump generates clicks and viewership. Historical tensions. Trump's labeling of the media as fake news and the enemy of the people has created a cycle of animosity. In 2018, he called the press the enemy, prompting a Senate resolution reaffirming the press's role. This hostility fuels adversarial reporting. Evidence of bias, contrasts with Obama and Biden. The media's treatment of Trump differs markedly from that of Obama and Biden. During Obama's presidency, Pew Research Center found that only 20% of coverage in his first 60 days was negative, compared to 62% for Trump. Biden's coverage, while less positive than Obama's, was generally more favorable than Trump's, with Pew noting higher confidence in Biden internationally. For example, Obama's economic recovery post-2008 was often praised, while Trump's job numbers, even when strong, were scrutinized for sustainability, resistance, lies, and cover-ups. The media's resistance manifests.